The fireworks appeared in the night sky and exploded with bright sparks. I looked up at the fireworks and shivered, adjusting my scarf. It had been a cold year, and on Christmas Day it was freezing cold, driving passers-by to get to the warmth of their homes. I hurried home again, shivering. It was late in the evening, and the bag with presents was pleasantly pulling my hand away. My son would be happy with a new constructor, and I had a couple of surprises for my wife. I smiled and quickened my steps when the back of my head exploded with a sharp pain. Black spots danced in my eyes, and I was surprised to see snow-covered asphalt rushing into my face, smashing my lips into blood. Before I fell into oblivion, I saw the figure of a tall man clutching an object in his hand, something like a hammer or a club. God, my head hurt. I groaned and tried to open my eyes. A bout of nausea made me regret it, and I gave up my pathetic attempts to open my eyelids. I felt like I was lying on something hard and cold, like stone or brick. The silence was broken only by the echoing sound of falling drops and the humming of the daylight bulbs. When I pulled myself together, I risked opening my eyes. Suppressing another bout of nausea, I looked around. My eyes were double and the ceiling was spinning, but I was able to get a good look at the place I was in. Basement. A damp, cold basement. A steel door with a small barred window. 2 nasty buzzing lamps hung from the ceiling. There was nothing else here, just bare brick walls. Rubbing the back of my head, I cringed. I couldn't see what was there, but it felt bad enough. Wiping my bloody fingers on my clothes, I started walking in circles along the walls to warm up a little and keep myself occupied. 5 steps along one wall and 7 along the other. I machine counted the steps and thought, who would want to kidnap me? I'm just a simple mid-level civil servant with no access to important information. I've never done anything bad to anyone in my life. I don't have much money, nothing to demand as ransom. Then maybe it's some kind of psychopath. An unpleasant chill ran down my spine. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside the door. The keys squeaked in the lock, and when the door swung open, I saw a man standing in the doorway. Tall, my height, plain shirt and jeans, inexpensive shoes. When my gaze shifted to his face, I was numb. Short blonde hair, grey-blue eyes, straight nose. Such a familiar face, the one I saw in the mirror every morning. It was like a twin brother. With a grin, he looked at me and remained silent, except his eyes weren't smiling, and they didn't bode well for me. They were cold and hateful, and it felt like he could see right through me. When the tension in the air reached its limit, the man parted his lips and said quietly, "Here we meet again." He took a quick step forward, and a short baton I hadn't noticed came crashing down on my head. Gulping for air, I fell to the floor. The man didn't rush to deliver a second blow. He just stood there watching me squirm on the cold floor, trying to get up. "What's that mean?" I spit up blood, trying to crawl away. "Oh, what does it mean?" He laughed. "Don't you get it? That's so sweet." Putting down the baton, he squatted down and looked me in the eye. "Doppelganger." He grinned crookedly. "A creature that takes the form of a man and lives his life. Let go." My brain refused to comprehend what was happening, confused and lost in fear. "I don't think so." Another blow of the baton made the light in my eyes fade again. I don't know how many days I've been in this basement. Because of the frequent fainting spells, I had lost track of time. All I have left is the constant pain and the unrelenting cold. Every few hours he comes and beats me, this time without saying a word. The fear was gone, leaving the place of dull fatigue. All I wanted was for it to be over soon, for him to drop another blow of the truncheon on my head, and I would die. Once again, crossing the cell in fruitless attempts to warm up, I suddenly experienced a strange feeling. As if I had forgotten something important, and now it was spinning at the edge of my consciousness, something that could help me. What did he say this demon was called? I wondered, remembering. Doppelganger. A memory suddenly came over me. So alien and yet so dear to me. Mine and yet someone else's. Joy, sadness, hate, love, and something else. Now I remembered when I'd seen him before. The damned brick wouldn't budge when I tore it from the wall with my fingernails. As I loosened the loose stone, I monotonously hummed a silly children's song to myself. After a while, I heard the familiar squeak of keys in the keyhole. This time I didn't try to dodge the blow. On the contrary, I lunged forward, and the stone in my hand struck the man in the temple with a thud. He collapsed to the ground with a quiet groan. I turned him over, found my keys, picked up my baton, and whistling, left the room, locking the door behind me. He'd made a good point, that man. Doppelgangers live the life of the person whose appearance they copy. Moreover, they become that person, acquire his nature, remembering their essence only in moments of extreme danger. Yes, we've met him before, and he managed to escape from the cage where I kept him. After that, he disappeared for years and I relaxed, thinking he was dead, and now he's back, apparently determined to get his life back. I chuckled. One thing he hadn't considered is that we're too resilient, and also, we're more cunning. And here was what I'd been looking for. Purring a children's song under my breath, I began to slowly brick up the doorway. It's good to have everything on hand, both cement and bricks, I thought with a smile. When the last brick was in place, I looked at my work with satisfaction and listened. There was a quiet sound, like someone scraping iron with his fingernails, and then a long groan. He seemed to realize he was in trouble. I laughed heartily. He won't bother me again. How much time I spent here. My wife must be in a panic. I grabbed a bag of presents and hurried home. All my life I have followed a strange custom in our land, and all my life I have regarded it as superstition. Now it's the only thing that can save me. Most people don't remember that Christmas is all about fear. Terror has been wrapped up in a pretty package, given the face of a jolly, bearded fat man, and wrapped in the jingle of bells and the clatter of 8 reindeers' hooves. But in my little town in Virginia's, they remember. We call the weeks leading up to Christmas the red season. On the first day of December, the first ribbons appear like so many scarlet wounds on the bellies of the oldest trees in front of our homes. At sunset, each family gathers on their lawn and tightly ties a ribbon, the color of blood. No bows, no jewelry, just one heavy knot. Each family member touches the ribbon before returning to their lives for another 24 hours. And then, everyone does it all over again. A new ribbon for every day before Christmas. To me, there was nothing strange about this custom. I'd been doing it all my life and thought everyone else was celebrating their red season too, until I invited my best friend Stephen to visit for the first time when I was 16. We met him online in one of the online games, and it took me almost 6 months to convince my parents that he wasn't some elderly pedophile. Convinced them to let him come visit us for a while. They finally agreed. The flight was booked, and 3 days before Christmas, he arrived in our red-tinted city. "You guys are having a blast, aren't you?" said Steve, looking out the window as we drove slowly down our street. "We should," my little sister Tessa wisely said from the back seat. She had insisted on coming with me to the airport, of course, to make sure Steve was who he said he was, my 12-year-old bodyguard. It's the only way to keep the frozen man at bay. The frozen man? Steve half turned toward her. I could clearly see the stamp of skepticism on his face, even with the corner of my eye. "It's just superstition," I grinned. "You don't have that in Idaho. Idaho ain't got shit. Look out, here comes the frozen man. Snatched from his icy slumber by your goodness and cheerfulness, now he is coming for you, the embodiment of terror, and your only salvation is to hide behind the stripes of red. A ribbon tied in front of the house will ward him off and keep you from the fate of the prey," Tessa dutifully recited. Steve laughed and she didn't like it. What? Is the whole town in on this frozen man thing? He looked at us alternately, smirking. Pretty much, yeah, I shrugged. If someone doesn't hang ribbons in front of their house, someone else does it for them. Those trees are all taped up. How long have you guys been doing this? 24 days, said Tessa. We have to tie ribbons until Santa comes and drives the frozen man back to his grave. Santa? For real? Well, it's more like the spirit of Christmas or the coming of Jesus or something like that. I thought I'd clarify. And what was so scary about the frozen man that everyone was doing? That? I let Tessa, still madly fascinated by the urban legend, explain the story of the frozen man herself, and she made the most of the opportunity. With the fervor of a true believer, the grim tale told of a forgotten and rejected vagrant who had been left to die in the street while people celebrated their Christmas. He was found in front of the church, frozen in place, standing with his hand outstretched to the door. People buried him in an unmarked grave on the outskirts and forgot about him, as if he were an unnecessary thing. But not until the following December. On the 1st, rumors spread that he was seen standing in the street under the windows of the townspeople. People started disappearing. The first day 1, the second day 2, and so on. And only those townspeople whose houses were decorated with red ribbons escaped the sad fate. No one knew why he could not cross the scarlet line, but since then, the red ribbon became a symbol of protection from evil spirits. But if it does find you, there's almost no way for you to escape. He moves only if you move, so you'll be doomed to stand still until you freeze. Or run, but with every step you take, he'll get closer and closer until he catches you. Tessa grabbed the air with both hands. The only way to escape is to get into the house, protected by the ribbons. That sounds stupid. Stephen grinned. Well, if you're so brave, maybe you should wait for him outside, Tessa said curtly. Maybe I will. Uh-huh. Okay. All right. Great start to the weekend. I introduced Steve to my parents, and they were relieved to see the same awkward teenager as in the photos. They showed him the house. It didn't take long for the lingering awkwardness of the first face-to-face meeting to fade, and then we booted up our laptops and started the game. That night, after another round of Call of Duty, Steve closed his laptop. And you really believe this frozen man nonsense? No, it's the same as all the other Christmas crap, like the evil Santa from Germany or wherever he's from and all that. So you wouldn't be upset if a few ribbons went missing? I rolled my eyes and leaned back in my chair. No, it's a fairy tale, so let's do it. What? Let's go and take some ribbons off. It'll be fun. We'll freak people out a little bit. I hesitated. Sure, I hadn't believed in the frozen man in a long time, but here was the punishment if we got caught was very real. Pissing off my parents, especially before some nice presents were expected for Christmas, was a much more frightening prospect than meeting a monster from a fairy tale. I don't know, man. Going through the neighbors' stuff. We could get in trouble. It's almost midnight. Who's going to be looking out the windows right now? We'll just take a quickie outside some house. Nobody's going to notice us. No one will know anything until the next morning. I could literally see the new external hard drive I've been dreaming of floating out from under the tree. Come on, Chris. Don't be such a cowardly bitch. It had been snowing all evening, and now the white blanket was crunching under our feet. I hid my hands icy despite the gloves deep in my jacket pockets. We're leaving footprints, I grumbled. They'll lead straight to my house. Quit whining, dumbass, Steve said dismissively. We'll just tramp back and forth across a few more driveways, so there'll be footprints there too. Stupidity. I wasn't happy with what was happening. Shut up and pick a house. And I've chosen Mrs. Barclay's house, an old lady who lived alone and always turned out the lights at 8:30 sharp. She must have been asleep at that late hour. We crept quietly across her lawn, and Steve cut the ribbons on the old tree with kitchen shears. Hurry up, I hissed. He waved me off and cut the last scarlet strip. With a triumphant grin, he stuffed the stack of ribbons into his pocket and sprinted to Mrs. Barclay's front door and back, leaving distinct footprints behind him. You run through those houses and I'll run through these. Let's go. By the time we'd finished, the chains of footprints were all over the street. Out of breath and flushed from the cold, we ran back to the house and collapsed in my room, clasping our hands over our mouths and choking with laughter. Steve held the cut ribbons victoriously above his head like a trophy. The neighbors were less amused by our nighttime antics. When they found the ribbons missing from Mrs. Barclay's tree in the morning, the town started talking about vandalism, which was much, much more serious than some legend. Stephen and I put on our most innocent faces, while my parents speculated about who could have done such a thing to the poor old lady's Christmas decorations. One of the neighbors rang the doorbell to check on her. Mrs. Barclay did not answer. She must have gone to her family in Edinburgh, said Dad. She was at home yesterday. My mom disagreed. Annie, it's only 3 hours away. It's not a round-the-world trip. Tessa, who had been watching from the porch with us, clutched at my arm with a pale face and wide eyes. Frozen man. Steve found the whole thing extremely hilarious. Let's do it again tonight, he whispered after everyone had gone inside. Everyone seemed pretty upset about it, I said, waving vaguely in the direction of Mrs. Barclay's house. And that's why it's so awesome. Come on, man, it's just a couple ribbons. If we get caught, we'll just tie new ones on. I sighed. I was definitely not getting a new hard drive. That night, Steve picked his own next target, the Jackson house down the street. Tessa was friends with their youngest daughter, Alice. And from what my sister told me, the poor thing was terrified that the frozen man was now coming for her. While the girls were playing, she couldn't talk about anything else. I thought it was a little mean to cut her ribbons knowing all this, but at the same time it was also funny, so I agreed. But this is the last time, okay? Steve shook his head, which could have meant both agreement and an ironic yes, of course. As soon as Dad's snores from his parents' room echoed through the house, we went downstairs and slipped out the front door. Me and Steve, again with the beloved scissors in my pocket. It was colder outside this time. You know, the kind of cold that seeps through all the layers of clothing and further into the deepest part of your body, penetrating to the bone. I clenched my teeth loudly, wrapping my arms around myself. Steve walked ahead, leaving long streaks of icy white vapor as he breathed. The weather cooled our enthusiasm. We reached the Jackson lawn at a near jog. Steve knelt by a ribbon tree and prepared a pair of scissors. A window opened over our heads. "What are you doing?" a quiet voice asked demandingly. Alice Jackson was staring down at us. I said, too stiff to think of a plausible answer. "Just checking your ribbons to make sure they're tight." Steve was very calm. "Then why do you need scissors?" Steve wasn't ready for that one. "You stole Mrs. Barclay's ribbons, didn't you?" Alice said accusingly. "You..." Her words were silenced by a stunned sigh. "Alice?" I called out to her as loudly as I dared, but she wasn't looking at us anymore. The girl's eyes, so wide open they wanted to jump out of her skull, were fixed on something behind us. Even in the dim light, I could see how pale her face had turned, and I turned to see what had frightened her so. There was a man standing in the middle of the street in the yellow light of the street lamps, haggard, with purple lips and a face disfigured by the dead spots of frostbite, and he was holding out his hand to us. He stood perfectly still, except for the rustle of his frozen clothes in the sharp wind that rattled the scarlet ribbon trees on either side of the road. "Steve!" I fumbled for my friend's shoulder and jerked him to his feet. "What are you?" I interrupted his indignation by poking him in the ribs with my elbow and pointing a finger at the road. The cold around us grew even more intense. "You've got to be kidding me." There was disbelief in Steve's startled voice. I gripped his hand even tighter. "Chris," he muttered less bravely, unable to take his eyes off the frozen figure, not mocking. I struggled to find the strength to respond. Alice's window slammed shut. The frozen man didn't move. I was frozen and now I couldn't let go of Steve's shoulder even if I tried. "Chris." I took a step back. The frozen man didn't move a muscle, I could swear to that, but somehow he took 2 steps closer. "What the fuck?" Steve's voice turned into a startled squeak. "To my house," I whispered, barely moving my frozen, stubborn lips. "Run." The house was only a minute's walk away, just a few meters up the street. But in the sudden darkness and hellish cold of the city, the short walk became an endless one. My legs refused to obey me, and I dragged myself along like a dream, desperately trying to run, but barely moving. Steve was doing no better. He whimpered, trying to get his frozen limbs to move. I looked over my shoulder. Wasted! Without changing position, the frozen man halved the distance between us. His ice-encrusted, whitish, dead eyes burned me like embers, and I forced myself to keep going. I pressed my chin to my chest and moved forward through the cold and the blizzard, rushing as fast as I could toward my house, toward the tree wrapped in red ribbons, burning in the dark like a beacon. I dived into the yard in a last dive, rolled through the snow, and leapt to my feet. The front door was so close. "Chris!" I didn't see Steve fall, but I heard it. The body hitting the pavement, the fussing and tossing as he tried to get to his feet. I turned around, holding out my hand to him. The frozen man was now standing over Steve, but he wasn't reaching forward. He bent over, crouched, interlocking his mangled fingers on Steve's jacket. I wailed, "Chris!" My friend shrieked one last time, and then I was left alone to scream into the deadly cold. My parents soon found me and took me to the hospital. Severe hypothermia required serious intervention. I regained consciousness, then lost it again, and as they told me later, kept saying that the frozen man had taken Steve. Mum and Tessa stayed by my bedside, and Dad volunteered to help the police track down my friend. And on Christmas Eve morning, they found him. In front of the church, frozen in place, standing there with his hand outstretched toward the door, and gaping at the door in a silent scream. The adults assumed we'd snuck out of the house and were lost outside because of the record cold that night. I, in their version, had managed to find my way home, but Steve had wandered into town, and since he didn't know anyone else, the police assumed that the boy had tried to find shelter in the church, but didn't make it. They called my certainty that the frozen man had taken him a hallucination. They tried to question Alice too, but she just sobbed, and everyone decided that the girl didn't need that kind of stress. The situation only worsened when Mrs. Barclay, named by me as another victim of the frozen man, returned home after spending Christmas with her children in Edinburgh. Steve's body was returned to Idaho to his parents. Red season was over. Everyone went on with their lives. Everyone except me. I still see Steve every night in my dreams, frozen, with his face contorted with a desperate cry and his hand raised. He didn't need no church. He needed me. All the years I've lived in this little town, I've read the red season, carefully wrapping the tree in my yard with tightly tied red ribbons every day from December 1st through the 24th. From beginning to end, but even now if I look out the window after midnight, I can see them. Two figures frozen like statues in the frosty night, reaching out to me, waiting for me, the one who escaped. Two now empty cups of strong black coffee had not warmed me up. The clock reads 2:15. Why am I awake? I'm afraid. Trite, I agree. And you cannot say that I need to be treated for phobias, or that you yourself are as brave as cats in the dark. I won't believe you. The mirror's only half a turn to the left, but that miserable 90 degrees is harder for me to overcome than a glass of vinegar. And the grey strand that's poking out of my hair tells me that what happened may not be a dream. That Christmas night was the worst night of my life. Do you remember the mirror fortune telling? A girl has to be alone in a room with a mirror and a candle in front of it. I decided to try it on myself. I conducted the rite at home. Since the apartment was left in my care, and of the living creatures remained only my cat, I allocated for divination of my bedroom, where the mirror cabinet is just opposite my bed. I put a candle in my bedroom and let my hair down. I thought it was unnecessary to strip naked. It was not the right upbringing to show off in front of the mirror, even at home without clothes. So, after waiting until midnight, I sat down in front of the candle, and looking into my reflection, I said several times, "Reveal my future to me." I'd never heard anything sillier from my own lips, but by an effort of will, I restrained myself from laughing. I stared at my reflection for a long time, trying to catch some glint in my eyes. Eventually, my eyes grew tired, and in the uneven candlelight, everything looked a little blurry. I even heard some scraping, which frightened me and made me finish the divination. When all the paraphernalia was put away, I decided to go to bed. My parents from the party could come home in the morning or even stay the night at a friend's house. So, I decided to lie down in the living room. My bedroom seemed a little uncomfortable now, and the mirror was especially disconcerting. So I closed the door to my room before I went to bed and made my bed on the living room couch. It was a little scary to fall asleep, but the cat came to me and his rumbling quickly put me to sleep. And I had a dream, as if I was sleeping on the sofa and the door to my room opened behind me, noiselessly and easily. And I hear footsteps, creaking, on the wooden parquet, heavy footsteps. My body is frozen. I'm afraid to move and I want to close my eyes, but they are already closed. Everything happens in a dream. Suddenly I heard a wheezing sound above me, and the next moment icy hands clamp down on my throat. Someone chokes me and I hear, "Bring back my youth, bring it back, I can't breathe. My whole body is cramped, I can't break free." Now the end will come, I think, and I finally wake up. All wet, cold sweat running down my neck. I look around like a mad woman, my heart pounding in my throat. The room was empty, and just as my eyes were getting used to the darkness, I noticed that the door to my bedroom was ajar. So I got up, turned on the lights in the whole apartment, turned on the TV, the first channel I could find, turned it up loud. Good thing it was Christmas. No one in the neighborhood would be outraged. I went into my room and froze. The mirror reflected the whole illuminated room. Only the girl who stood in my place had hair that wasn't dark blonde. It was grey. I clamped my mouth with the palm of my hand to suppress a scream, and the reflection did the same. I was afraid to even approach the mirror, and my mind refused to believe what was happening. I slammed the door to my room and rushed to the phone. As I dialed the number of my parents' friends, I could have sworn I heard someone walking around in the room. The long beeps for a minute intensified my panic. I could literally feel someone's eyes on me. I darted into the living room, where I nearly killed myself on the floor, tripping over my furry pet who ran right under my feet. After getting up and making sure my arms and legs were in one piece, I looked around and was horrified at how many mirrored surfaces there were in the house. Stained glass windows, my mum's secretary closet, the mezzanine doors. Everywhere I could see my frightened face. And at some point I noticed that my reflection was changing. It began to shrivel up before my eyes. I cried out, and covering my face with my hands, ran to the kitchen where there were no reflective surfaces. I shakily brewed coffee, keeping my face as far away from the water as possible. And even in the reflection of the poured beverage, I could catch a fleeting glimpse that I was no longer me in the reflection. 2 o'clock in the morning. How much more time would it take for my craziness to pass? I won't be able to sleep. I noticed something. There's a mirror behind the kitchen cabinet door. While making coffee, I accidentally touched it and the door opened. Only a 90-degree turn separates me from what's lurking there. I'm not going to sleep. Right now, I'm going to pull my knees up to my chest and wrap my arms tightly around them. I'll sit up and rock until the wee hours of the morning, humming some tune so I won't hear the creaks and sounds from outside the bedroom and living room. And maybe, if my parents don't get home too late, they'll catch their daughter changed beyond recognition, but alive.